All right, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do today is we're going to start a second eye. We all know our practice from the first one. The first eye, we learned how to make that sort of half dome shape with the clay. We worked with making lids, and we tried to sculpt those lids so they would cover nice and create the little tear duct here. And that was our first introduction to how to make an eye with just using our hands for the most part. Today we'll try to use a little bit of tools. You can smush this up, break this thing apart, and reuse the clay in here, or you could simply start with fresh stuff. Either or. All these practices are going to get pulled apart later on. What you see is I've already started making some of my little clay meatballs, and again, we want to keep those meatballs so that they're approximately the size of a quarter. You can see from this angle it's a little bit smaller than a quarter, but it is round. And more importantly than that, whatever ones that you make here to work with, I'd like you to try to keep them all the same size for the most part. And you know, with this, we're going to do a second eye. That second eye is going to be a little bit different. We're going to add a little bit more to it. We're going to do something different with the eyeball itself. So please just bear with me. Just as a review, remember, whatever little meatball we make, we want to make sure that it's nice and smooth all the way around like an egg, that it doesn't have any creases or folds. And if it does, make sure that you smooth those things out. And again, we're working with just about the size of a quarter. I'll recommend that you don't work any smaller than that, because smaller than that becomes a little bit harder to work with. If you work a little bit bigger, that's okay, especially if you have really big fingers and things like that. But for the most part, what I would recommend to you is keep it to the size of the quarter. What I started to do is I started to flatten out this little meatball. So one side is starting to get flat. I'm trying to keep the opposite side, the eyeball side, round. So I'm going to gently press, especially on the outer edges, and I don't want to lose the roundness of that eye. We don't want to start making this into like a football. We don't want to flatten it out too much. We basically want it to be like a half semicircle, and when you do that, you realize it starts getting a little bit bigger, and now mine's pretty much exactly as big as the quarter. I'm going to look at it from the side. You can see I have the one side that's flat, the other side that's round, and again, I use the reference as like a hamburger bun. So I'm trying to make a little hamburger bun, and that's going to be the start of my eye, just the same way as we did before. This time we're going to do something slightly different. Now you're going to do this, it will fail, and you'll have to start over. It takes a little practice, it's a little bit of trial and error, but we're going to start using the toothpick right now. And with the toothpick, what we want to do is we want to find, dead center. We want to kind of approximate dead center on that little eye that we created. And again, flat on one side, and you can see how round I kept the other side. And I'm really trying to keep this circular. I'm going to take my toothpick, and whatever I think is like the dead center on it, and kind of hold it up so you can see. You see I've kind of put it in the middle. I'm going to push that all the way through. All right, so it's touching the table. Now this part, please don't try to rush. What I'm going to do is I'm trying to now take this little toothpick, and I'm trying to move it around in a circle. If you do this too fast, what you're going to get is it's going to be very sloppy looking. It's going to be circular. But what you can see I'm doing is I'm widening the hole that I just made. I just pierced this all the way through, and now I'm just kind of lightly widening it. All right? And again, the toothpick's all the way to the bottom. And what I want to do is I'm trying to make right now what's going to be the iris of the eye, the color part of the eye. And that color part of the eye, we're going to be creating the effect of that with shadow. And how are we creating that shadow? It's by making a hole. And you'll see, if you see sculptures in real life, you might see some from like the Greek and Roman times. You'll see that a lot of times the way the pupils look are they're basically carved out holes over here. Now the hard part of doing this is that we want to slowly make it a little bit larger without flattening out that eyeball and without making it too lopsided. So when you see like mine's getting a little crooked, before I do any more to it, I kind of want to pinch it around a little bit to try to keep that circular. Again, you can see that hole going all the way through. That'll be the darkest part of the shadow. That's really going to be the pupil of the eye, all right? And you don't have to make that much bigger. It kind of gets big on its own. And you can see how I'm lightly turning the clay now. I'm holding the toothpick on an angle. and I'm just turning the clay a little bit. So I'm just trying to widen that hole, and I'm trying to keep it pretty much as circular as I can. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but you're going to take that slow, and then you're going to sort of pat those edges together and really try to keep that center little hole that you made. It's almost like the top of a volcano. I'm going to try to keep that as even as you can. And how big should you make it? Well, you know what? If it's really, really tiny, it really doesn't work. We want to try to keep this to the scale of real human eyes. So we want to kind of make it, well, so it looks like it's about half the size of that whole eyeball itself. You can see what I've done over here. Again, this may not work out for you on the first try. It may just, sort of come apart, or you try to do it too fast, or you press into it. So if it does, just squeeze that clay back up, make it into a ball, and try again. I'm building in a lot of time for you to trial and error to do this, screw up, and then do it again. But what you see over here, I've kind of made my little meatball. All right, I've made it into like a volcano's top. I put my toothpick all the way through it, and I move that around now to try to make that what's going to be the iris of my eye and the pupil. You can see that I've created a little bit of shadow just by making that hole. And the biggest thing about making that hole is trying to keep it centered and trying to keep it even. We don't want it to look like a square in the middle of this thing. We don't want it to look like an oval. So you got to take your time, go slowly. And again, I have my toothpick all the way through. I'm kind of just either making little circles with it, and then once I get that big enough, I'm kind of holding it on an angle, and I'm just turning my clay a little bit. So I can try to keep that hole that I'm making really dead center. And no matter how many times you do this, it's not ever going to be perfect, but that you can always come back and kind of pinch with your fingers to try to get it looking centered again. You can see mine right there. You can see right through it. So that center part, this is the shadow down here, is going to be representative of the pupil, and this sort of dugout cone shape that I put in there is going to represent the color part of the eye. The rest of it's the white of the eye. All right, so I've got my eyeball, and this might take you 2 or 3 tries. Don't get frustrated if you can't do it on the first try. I've been doing this a long time. It's not the easiest thing for me to do, but this is why we're practicing that. We're taking it up a notch. I'm going to take this, I'm going to move it to the side, and now I'm going to work on my eyelids. Again, just to review how to make those eyelids, we want to sort of pinch our clay between our fingers. This time I'm flattening it out, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stretch it out long ways to kind of be a piece for the eyelids. And this will be all basically a refresher for you from the long week off. You guys know how to do this if you did the first eye. The most important element of doing this, though, is trying to keep it equal thickness. We don't want one part of this eyelid to be super, super thick and then lumpy and thin in another part. Even if you make it too thick or too thin, the evenness of that thickness is really what's important. And we're going to work on that, just try to stretch this out till it's about, I guess, almost like at least twice the length of that eye thing. Don't make it too thin. You'll find too thin becomes unworkable. If it's too thick, that's not a bad thing. You'll get used to the right amount of thickness as you go along. But if you want to compare mine, it is maybe like 3/4. If you stacked up 3/4, you could see how thick mine is, and I think that's a good working size. Again, we're using the same size little clay ball as we did for the eye, so if you use the same size, you should be getting them similar size to me. And again, once you stretch it out, it should pretty much be like 2 eyeballs. Then I'm going to make the lower lid. The lower lid, I am going to start sort of rounding this piece off a little bit by running my finger across it to make it like that little smiley. All right, I'm just going to look to keep the lid, the thickness of that lid, even. And remember, this edge that's going to be the bottom lid, we can't really mess with that that little edge once we put it on. So however we're going to make it, we want to make sure it looks good and it's even before we put it on. So I've got that little bottom part over there. I'm not going to attach it yet. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get that little tiny piece of clay and I make that tear duct again. Again, you can make that tear duct on whatever side you want. Really doesn't matter. I think last time I put it on this side. This time I'll put it on that side. So I'm just going to take that little tiny ball of clay, and really it doesn't need to be much, and I'm just going to kind of press it into my eye. So now I have my eye, I've got my tear duct, and I got my lower lid. Now the lower lid, and this is where it's going to be slightly different. The lower lid is different than the upper lid. We have that little bit of curve in it, all right? And we want to line that up pretty much so it doesn't cover our iris, all right? That's not going to be the same thing for the top part. You're going to see the top lid's going to be a little bit different. So we want it like pretty close to the bottom of that circle, but not all the way down. If you do it like this, it's going to make the eye tend to look like it's looking upwards. If you put it way down over here, it looks like it's surprised. We're going to place it just underneath that little part. And then again, I'm just going to kind of roughly fit it around the eye. I don't want to press anything in until I feel good about it, but you know, I feel pretty decent about mine so far. So you can see I left just a little bit of space between the bottom of this and the top of the lower lid. And then I want to kind of just make sure that lower lid hugs around the eyeball. I'm just going to press it in lightly. I don't want to smash the eyeball. I don't want to smash the little muscle I made. I just want to make sure everything fits in nicely. And that's going to be the start of my lower lid. Got to make the upper lid now. Okay? Got my little meatball. Going to start pressing it together. Again, don't try to stretch this out super fast. Don't try to work faster. I'm working pretty fast as it is for the demo purposes because I want to do it all inside, you know, at this point 20 minutes or so. But don't rush these things. The slower you work the clay, the more likely it is that you're not going to make a big mistake. The more likely it is that you're going to get everything looking very similar to the way that I have it over here. And once again, we want to keep the thickness of the upper lid approximately the same as the lower. We want to stretch it out again so it's at least as big as 2 of the eyeballs. And that's a good way. If you start with all the same size little meatballs, you're going to find that things will look exactly like mine do, and they'll be about the same size. You see that even thickness all the way through, maybe about like the thickness of maybe like 3/4 stacked together. All right, maybe a little bit less. As long as it's even, just don't make it too thin. And for the upper lid, we really want to curve this lid a little bit more. You're going to see me dragging my finger across this thing, sort of bending it into that smiley face. Again, as I'm doing this, I'm checking that the thickness of the lid doesn't get all out of whack. And then again, I'm really trying to make that a little extra round. You can see my upper lid and how it's set up, okay? Nice and round. And I want to kind of rough fit it, okay? Now, for the purposes of creating an eye like this, all right, if we put it all the way up here, this makes the eye look like, oh my God, I'm really surprised, or I'm shocked, or my eyes are wide open. It's not really always a great look unless you want to make a character that looks really, really intense or awake or excited. Generally, if you're looking straight ahead, what you'll see is that your lower lid shows a little bit more of the white of the eye over here, and the upper lid kind of covers up a little bit of that circle. So what we want to do is we kind of want to rough fit this so I don't cover up my little tear duct, and that I do cover up a little bit of the top of that iris. All right, if you put this down too low, it's going to look like you're kind of sleepy or really tired. All right, or really, really low. That doesn't work. If you put it up really, really high, it's going to create a completely different look. What I want to do is I want to kind of get a relaxed, looking straight forward look, which is going to be a little bit of the top of the iris part, that part we made that volcano, a little bit of that is going to get covered up. And you can see the lower lid comes down a little bit lower, and the bottom isn't covered up. And this would be like looking straight ahead. So what I mean by rough fitting it is I mean like laying it down right now to try to see it as it lies with everything before I mush it together. I want to make sure that I didn't cover up this tiny little detail over there, that I didn't mush any of that out, and that my lid looks pretty good from other angles so that it's not, you know, too lumpy or too big or anything else like that. Again, I do the upper lid last because I want it to overlap on top of the lower one, and then really over here it's about a little bit of care. I want to kind of blend those two together. I want to blend them together without crushing any of those little details over there. This side I'm going to blend together, and I can even leave a little bit of it, like right in the corner here, oops, unblended. That's okay. That's okay. If you look at our actual faces, there's a little bit of a split there. But you notice I didn't mush together anything up over here, and I've really tried to keep the look of this eye pretty good. Now I'm going to add one more element to this, which is going to be new to it, and that's going to be, usually when your eyes are open, your lids, the eyelids sort of crease up. You know, when you close your eyes, you can see all of your eyelid. When they're open, they sort of tuck underneath each other. So you have a fold really where your upper eyelid touches. Now, for everybody, that fold might be a little bit different. It could be a little bit wider, and you could see a little bit more of the upper lid. It could be very much on top of it, where you have a really like low eyebrow. That all depends on the person. But we're going to learn how to make this, because when we make the full face, we're going to want to see the eyelid and try to make it a little more realistic. So what I'm doing is I'm making a third eyelid now. That third eyelid is going to go up top over here, and it's going to represent sort of the crease in the eye. So when you look at like my face that I made earlier, you can see it's sort of doubled over here, because when the eyes open, they sort of tuck up into that. So in this case, we're making a third, count them, 3 lid basically shapes, and again, same thickness, okay, even all throughout, at least 2 eyes wide, and this is going to go on the upper lid. So that upper lid tucks up into the orbital bone. Over here we'll have an eyebrow later on. Since it's going into my upper lid, again, I want to kind of make it a little bit round, okay? Curve it a little bit, and more importantly, just make sure that part of the lid, because we're not going to redo this once it's stuck. We want to make sure that that's nice and even. So we're going to take that, and again, we're going to rough fit it to my face. Now, there's no right or wrong distance to put this in. But what I want to see is that, you know, it might be a little tighter here, and there could be a little bit more space on the outside. Okay? And again, this is the crease that happens because your upper lid sort of folds up into your head a little bit. Now, you could put it a little bit lower, really like right on top of it. You could put it a little bit higher, but the higher you put it, it's like if your eyebrows were raised. Like if your eyebrows are raised, like you're really, you know, inquisitive or looking, this space will get bigger and bigger. What I'm doing is I'm showing, not really that much, just a little bit of that fold. I'm going to make sure that sort of fits around. Again, you can see the thickness. It's important to have even thickness on this. And then the same thing, what I want to do is I kind of want to just blend the edges together. So I'm not going to touch in here. I really want that to kind of just hold together. But right in here, I'm going to kind of mush it together so these two pieces connect on the outside edge. I'm leaving that little crease in there. It's really actually there. And you can always look in the mirror and look at how your own eyes look for a reference. But I'm just going to kind of press that in. And this is going to be my second level, second attempt at an eye. All right, it's a little bit more detailed than the last eye. You can see what I did with the pupil and the sort of lids to kind of take it up a notch. So we learned our basic where we have this sort of alien eye. Now we have one that we could see like that darkness and the shadow in the back's our pupil. This is our color part of the eye. And now we have a sort of a double top lid. This is really not another eyelid. What it is the crease of skin that is going to go up into ultimately your eyebrow. So that's our second eye, a little bit different than the first one. We should be sort of reinforcing some of the hand building techniques that you had with the first one. Now with the second one, you know, it should be relatively even. It's handmade, it's not going to be perfect, but really what I want you to get is those edges are all finished edges before you put them on. You don't really smush them out, and really all we do is we kind of connect the dots on the last one. I'm going to make sure, as always with everything that we make sure that we grab a couple photos of it and submit.